The G7 leaders, including the US, Japan, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, the UK, and the non-member organization of the European Union, are set to meet in Fasano, Italy from June 13th to 15th. The summit focuses on the Ukraine war and aims to assist Ukraine, impose further sanctions on Russia, and address issues related to migration and climate change. However, the summit has shown that the world is more polarized and closer to conflict, with weak leaders leading the way. The G7 countries, except for Italy, are experiencing political change, with embattled leaders like President Joe Biden and Justin Trudeau, who have historically low approval ratings, and politically weakened leaders like France's Macron, Germany's Scholz, Japan's Kishida, and the UK's Sunak. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, and EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen are the exceptions, but with so many unpopular G7 leaders, it is possible many could lose their positions by the time of the 2024 G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro. The primary agenda item for the summit was to support Ukraine and punish Russia. Japan signed a 10-year non-lethal aid agreement with Ukraine, while the US signed a 10-year agreement with Ukraine, committing the US to providing weapons, intelligence sharing, and judicial and anti-corruption reforms. However, the agreement is non-binding to the current or future administration because President Biden will not send it to the Senate to be ratified as a treaty. The G7 leaders have agreed to support Ukraine with a $50 billion loan, likely to be paid back using the interest from $300 billion of Russian assets frozen by the West. This could hurt foreign investment, especially from the global south. The G7 members also agreed to tighten sanctions against Russia and those entities and countries that assist Russia in avoiding sanctions. They called on Iran to stop its nuclear weapons ambitions and to stop selling weapons to Russia for use in Ukraine. The G7 also cautioned China against aiding Russia in its war against Ukraine by supplying dual-use equipment and materials. European leaders see China's support for Russia as a direct threat to European security, necessitating a more direct response to curtail this support. The G7 is also focusing on and issuing warnings about other methods of circumventing sanctions, such as third-party sales. The G7 is also focusing on an identified shadow fleet of ships which aids Russia in circumventing Western sanctions imposed on its oil and gas trade. However, the West cannot convince other oil producers to increase production to compensate for lost Russian oil production, so it must allow Russian oil to remain on the market to avoid a price shock. The G7 is also inviting some world leaders from the global south to join in bilateral talks with the G7 leaders with the intent to reduce Russian and Chinese influence in that emerging region and attempt to convince the region to support the Russian sanctions.